Mark, a 40-year-old man, had believed for a decade and a half that he had a solid, happy marriage with his wife, Sarah. They had 2 children, Jacob, who was 12, and Lily, who was 9. Sarah and Mark had experienced tough times, but he had always thought they were a team. He trusted her completely, which made the betrayal so devastating when it began 6 months earlier. Mark started to notice a change in Sarah. She was suddenly working late all the time and going on spontaneous trips with her friends to de-stress. He tried to ignore his suspicions, but her phone was a dead giveaway. She never let it out of her sight, clutching it as if it were a precious gem. If he so much as looked at it, she would snap, demanding privacy. One night, Mark finally confronted her. "Sarah, what's going on?" he asked. "You're always distant," she replied with something that chilled him to the bone. "I just need new experiences. Life's short. I'm considering going on a date." He laughed, thinking it was a joke, but her serious expression told him otherwise. Numb, Mark realized his entire perception of their marriage was a lie. He didn't yell. He just sat there, stunned. The next morning, he made a decision. He had to know the truth. He began by checking her bank statements, something he had never done. He found charges for restaurants, hotels, and expensive gifts he had never seen. He knew he needed more proof, so he contacted his old friend, a former colleague who now worked as a private investigator. The friend warned him this wouldn't be easy, but Mark needed to know the truth. For the next week, Mark pretended everything was normal while his friend, whom he called Alex, tracked Sarah's movements. One evening, Alex called him. "Mark, I have something. Meet me tomorrow. You'll want to see this." Mark barely slept, bracing himself for the worst. The next morning, at a quiet coffee shop, Alex handed him a large envelope. Inside were photos of Sarah with a man Mark didn't recognize. They were holding hands and walking into a hotel. The man's name was Daniel, a successful architect who was also married. Alex told him the affair had been going on for 5 months during Sarah's late nights. Back at home, Mark watched Sarah scrolling on her phone, acting as if nothing was wrong. The anger burned inside him, but he knew he had to be smart. Over the next few days, he collected more evidence: bank records, phone logs, and Alex's photos. One night, at dinner with the kids, Sarah mentioned she was going to a friend's place for the weekend. Mark knew she was lying. That night, after the kids were asleep, he confronted her again. "What's wrong, Mark?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Are you seeing someone else?" She laughed a fake, hollow laugh. She then tried to turn it on him, calling him paranoid and controlling. But he wasn't fooled. Mark spent his nights organizing all the evidence in a folder. A week later, Alex called again with more terrible news. Sarah had been funneling money from their joint account into a separate one with Daniel. She was stealing from him. This revelation sent him over the edge. He immediately locked down their finances and met with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Elizabeth. "You're in a strong position, Mark," she said after reviewing his evidence. "The photos and financial records are solid. However, things get complicated with the children." The next time Sarah announced a weekend trip with friends, Mark installed a tracking app on her phone. Later that night, Alex called and confirmed she was at the same hotel with Daniel. Mark drove there and watched them walk in together. He took his own photos, clear and undeniable evidence. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, looking at the folder full of proof. He was done pretending. The next morning, Sarah came into the kitchen humming a tune, completely oblivious. "Morning," she chirped. "You okay? You look tired." "Sarah, we need to talk," Mark said, sliding the folder across the table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. As she looked at the photos, bank records, and text messages, her face went pale. "How dare you spy on me? You're insane!" she shrieked, trying to play the victim. "You lied, you cheated, and you stole," he countered. "Don't pretend you're the victim." Mark informed her that he had already spoken to a lawyer and was filing for divorce. "You're not taking my children from me," she yelled, her voice shaking. "I'm protecting them from you," he said firmly. Then he revealed his trump card. He had spoken to Daniel's wife, a woman named Victoria. Victoria had provided screenshots of texts where Sarah and Daniel discussed their plan to lie in court and make Mark look like the bad guy. For the first time, Sarah realized she had lost. Mark met Victoria later that day at a cafe. She was calm and tired, like him. They pieced everything together, and she even agreed to testify if needed. As he drove home, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in months. He was going to rebuild his life, free from her lies. A few days later, his lawyer, Elizabeth, called. The bad news was that Sarah's lawyer had requested a custody evaluation, trying to paint him as controlling. The good news was that with Victoria's testimony and the texts, they had leverage to show the judge exactly what they were planning. The final straw came when Elizabeth called him, saying Victoria had a voice recording of Daniel admitting that Sarah was planning to lie in court and use their children as pawns. This changed everything. On the day of the court hearing, Sarah tried to play the victim, but her lies were exposed. Elizabeth presented all the evidence, and she played the damning recording. The judge was furious and ruled in Mark's favor. He was granted primary custody of Jacob and Lily, with Sarah's visits supervised. As they walked out, Victoria approached him and said, "You did it, Mark." "We did it," he replied. During a supervised visit, Sarah begged him to take her back, claiming she was going to therapy and had cut ties with Daniel. He just told her, "You don't get to destroy our lives and then pretend you're the victim." That night, when Lily asked why their mother didn't live with them, he simply told her that sometimes adults make choices that hurt people they love. A few months passed. Mark got an unexpected call from Victoria. She said Sarah was spiraling and had been trying to get Daniel back. That weekend, Sarah showed up for a supervised visit alone, without the supervisor. She tried to take the kids, but Mark stood his ground. She screamed at him, calling him a liar and manipulator, but then she got back in her car and sped off, defeated. A few months later, Mark received a handwritten letter from Sarah. It was a messy but legible apology. "I'm sorry," it read. "Not just for cheating, but for everything." She admitted she didn't know who she had become and that she hated that person. She said he was a better parent than she ever was. It wasn't enough, but for the first time, it felt like she was taking some responsibility. Mark didn't respond. Life moved on. Jacob made the soccer team, and Lily started piano lessons. One day, Jacob asked him, "Dad, are you happy now?" His words hit Mark hard. Mark smiled and said, "Yeah, Jacob, I am." They were free of the lies and betrayal that Sarah had brought into their lives. In the narrative, several signals indicated shifts in Sarah's behavior that Mark interpreted as minor or temporary, without deeper inquiry. First, her sudden pattern of working late and taking spontaneous trips with friends was framed as de-stressing, but this marked a departure from their established routine, which Mark chose to overlook to avoid conflict. Second, Sarah's possessive behavior with her phone, never leaving it unattended and reacting defensively when Mark glanced at it, suggested secrecy, yet he dismissed it as a need for privacy rather than probing further. Third, her direct statement about needing new experiences and considering a date was a blatant verbal cue, but Mark initially laughed it off as a joke, clinging to his perception of their stable marriage. These signs accumulated over 6 months, including unexplained financial charges later discovered, but Mark's initial response was to suppress suspicions, reflecting a pattern of rationalization to preserve harmony. Mark's blind spot centered on his idealized view of their 15-year marriage as solid and team-oriented, which created an assumption of unwavering trust that blinded him to gradual erosions. For instance, when Sarah became distant and guarded with her phone, he confronted her once but accepted her dismissal without pursuing a deeper dialogue, prioritizing avoidance over clarification to maintain the facade of normalcy. Another key moment was after her comment about dating. Stunned, he sat in silence and only acted the next day, delaying emotional processing. Even with mounting unease, he pretended everything was normal during the investigation week, turning a blind eye to daily inconsistencies, like her oblivious humming, as exploring them might shatter his self-image as a trusting partner. These avoidance tendencies stemmed from a fear of confronting potential loss, leading him to internalize suspicions rather than initiate vulnerable conversations early on. The betrayal extended beyond the physical affair with Daniel, encompassing layers of deception that undermined the foundation of their shared life. The infidelity itself violated emotional and relational exclusivity, lasting 5 months and involving intimate outings funded partly by joint resources. Deeper elements included pervasive lying. Sarah fabricated excuses for her absences, such as work or friend trips, creating a false narrative that isolated Mark in ignorance. Financial misuse added another dimension, as she diverted family money to a secret account with Daniel, devaluing their partnership and treating shared assets as personal tools for her pursuits. Lack of accountability surfaced in her reactions, initial denials, victim playing, "How dare you spy on me?" and attempts to shift blame onto Mark as paranoid or controlling, avoiding ownership of the harm caused. Later manipulations, like planning to lie in court and using the children as pawns, further eroded trust, turning the betrayal into a calculated effort to protect herself at the family's expense. Before the revelation, the relationship appeared stable on the surface, built on years of teamwork and shared parenting, but underlying imbalances hinted at emotional drift. Mark's complete trust masked potential complacency, while Sarah's growing dissatisfaction manifested in withdrawal, possibly from feeling unfulfilled in the routine. This created a dynamic of unspoken needs, where Sarah sought external validation without addressing issues internally, fostering resentment on both sides. After the affair came to light, the dynamics shifted to adversarial. Mark transitioned from passivity to strategic action, gathering evidence and setting boundaries, driven by anger and a need for control amid vulnerability. Sarah oscillated between defensiveness, manipulation, and eventual partial remorse, as seen in her letter, reflecting internal conflict but delayed accountability. The post-revelation phase emphasized power struggles, particularly around custody, evolving from partnership to opposition, with Mark finding empowerment in independence and Sarah confronting consequences, ultimately leading to a restructured family focused on the children's stability. In reflecting on such experiences, it's evident that relationships often reveal their true depth through crisis, where overlooked subtleties can unravel long-held assumptions, yet this unraveling also opens avenues for personal clarity and renewed priorities, allowing individuals to navigate forward with greater awareness of their own resilience and needs.